The labels that you place upon yourself and that others place upon you have such a huge impact in who you are, and there's a social experiment that did a phenomenal job at showcasing this, and it's called the Rosenhan Experiment. So in this experiment, psychologists faked having mental illness symptoms in order to get admitted into psychiatric hospitals, but once they were in these hospitals, they acted completely normal, and the doctors still labeled them as mentally ill despite their normal behavior. And the key takeaway in this experiment is that once you accept a label, your mind is going to continue to reinforce that label. And this can be in regards to anything. So it can be in regards to a mental health diagnosis, but it can also be in regards to being labeled as a failure or not good enough or broken. And the dangerous part about labels is that once you accept them, they not only become internal limitations, but self-fulfilling prophecies. And you can even see this take place in society as a whole, because most people live in that mental prison of societal expectations and allowing others' perceptions to define what's worthy, successful, or normal. So in today's Talk with Tyy Tuesday, we're gonna dive deeper into this experiment, as well as break free of any labels that you feel you may be attached to in order to find who you are outside of that label. So if you're interested, let's get into it. Hey lovelies, welcome back to my channel and welcome if you're new. My name is Tyla. Thank you so much for joining me for today's Talk with Tyy Tuesday. I have a super intriguing social experiment called the Rosenhan Experiment, and this shows how labels shape reality. I also have a few videos on other really interesting social experiments, so I'll leave those in the description and at the end of this video as well. So I have my notes and we're just gonna go right into breaking down this experiment. This experiment was conducted in 1973 by a psychologist named David Rosenhan. His experiment challenged the reliability of mental health diagnoses and showed how powerful labels can be in shaping our reality. So Rosenhan and 7 other pseudo patients, including a housewife, graduate students, and psychologists, secretly infiltrated 12 different psychiatric hospitals across the US. Each of them pretended to have only one symptom, which was hearing voices that said empty, hollow, or thud. Now, aside from them pretending to have one of these diagnoses, they acted completely normal. All of them were diagnosed with either schizophrenia or a bipolar disorder and were immediately admitted. So once they got inside, they stopped faking the symptoms, but the doctors still labeled them as mentally ill, and the average stay was 19 days, with one of the patients being held for nearly 2 months. Now, the crazy part about this is that the doctors never realized that they were faking, but some of the patients actually did and told them, "You're not crazy, are you?" So phase 3 was the dehumanization and confirmation bias. So since the doctors already told them that they had a mental illness, they interpreted their normal behavior as proof of illness. So taking notes was seen as obsessive behavior, and showing anxiety about being locked up was labeled as paranoia. Hospital staff barely interacted with them and often ignored their requests, making them feel invisible, which in reality, whether you do have a genuine diagnosis or not, is just a sick way to be treated based off of a diagnosis. Now, phase 4 was the follow-up shock. After hearing about the study, one hospital challenged Rosenhan to send more fake patients, claiming they'd detect them. Rosenhan agreed but never actually sent anyone, yet the hospital still falsely identified 41 real patients as fakers. This showed how unreliable psychiatric diagnoses were. And the crazy part about labels is that once you do have a label on you, it creates this filter to where people see you as that label despite what you show otherwise. And I feel like this is even a bit of a placebo effect, because if you believe something is real, you're going to start acting as if that thing is real. So say that you do have a label or you're defined by a certain label, you're going to start acting in ways that resonate with that label. So to give some examples, a child that may have been labeled as lazy may struggle with confidence despite being a hard worker. Or a kid that was labeled as being trouble in school may start getting blamed for things that they didn't even do. Once you label yourself as something or are labeled as something, your mind is going to find proof of that everywhere, even if it's not real, because it's going to try and justify that belief. And I really stress this the most when it comes to mental health, because if your mind is not right, a lot of other things in your life won't be right, and it's going to be very hard for you to show up in the way that you want if you're not in a good place mentally. And a lot of the times when people do get these mental health disorders, they feel as though they can't come back from it. They feel as though they're always going to be this, or they're always going to experience this. And that was something that I used to think when in that moment of being depressed and going through my seasons where I just felt low, where I felt like I didn't want to exist anymore. And even looking back at that time in my life, I realized that I had the power all along to break free from that label. I had the power all along to create the life that I want, to find peace and happiness, and to change things and my reality. So I'm going to give you guys a little backstory on my experience with my mental health diagnosis. So a couple years ago, I was going through a lot of traumatic events, and it was clear as day that the symptoms I was experiencing were depression, and I had high anxiety and PTSD. Now, before this phase of my life, I had never experienced anything like this, so I knew that it was just something that I had to overcome in that season. Eventually, I ended up going in to get a real diagnosis by a psychiatrist, and I was told that I had major depressive disorder and PTSD. Two of which I definitely agree I struggled with, but just being in that place and in that office, I did not feel right. I felt so out of place. I felt like I did not belong there, and especially when it came to having that discussion of taking medication for it. And I bring up this story because in that moment, I knew that I did not want to be bound by that label and that that wasn't going to be who I am for the rest of my life. So I worked on ways to overcome those feelings naturally so that I can break free from that label and step into a version of myself that I wanted to identify with. And this is such a major key when it comes to anything, even outside of just mental health labels. You're so much more than any label that's been placed upon you or that you've placed upon yourself. So give yourself the freedom in being who you want to be outside of any labels. And the mind is very powerful, so you have to really watch the way that you think about yourself and the beliefs that you hold about yourself, even the beliefs that you hold about the world, because that will really shape your reality. And you do not have to be bound to anything that does not align with your highest self, even if that comes to societal expectations. But that is it for this video, you guys. I do hope that you enjoyed and found this video useful. If you did, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in my next video. Peace and much love.